Tom Bradley never expected his last salvage run to end with him tumbling through the atmosphere of a planet that looked like it was bleeding. Red dust swirled around his damaged pod as it scraped against jagged rocks, sending sparks flying in all directions. The old mechanic gritted his teeth and fought with the controls, but 40 years of fixing other people's ships couldn't help him now. His own vessel was dying around him. The crash came hard and fast. Metal screamed against stone, and Tom's world went black for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he opened his eyes, everything hurt. His ribs ached, his left arm was bleeding, and the taste of copper filled his mouth. But he was alive, which was more than he had expected when his navigation system started throwing errors 3 days ago. Tom crawled out of the wreckage and looked around. The landscape stretched out like a nightmare painted in shades of red and orange. Twisted spires of crystal jutted up from the ground like broken teeth, and the air shimmered with heat that made everything look like it was underwater. In the distance, something that might have been a mountain range disappeared into clouds that looked more like smoke. His survival scanner was still working. Barely. The readings made his stomach drop. The atmosphere was toxic to humans without a suit, which he had lost in the crash. He had maybe 6 hours of the emergency air in his lungs before the poisonous gases would start eating him from the inside. The planet's wildlife, according to the scanner, was both aggressive and plentiful, and the nearest shipping lane was so far away that no rescue team would ever find him here. Tom had always been good at fixing things that seemed impossible to repair. Ships that other mechanics called scrap, he could usually get running again, with some creative thinking and a lot of patience. But he had never tried to fix a situation this hopeless before. He was gathering what supplies he could from the pod when something caught his eye. About half a mile away, barely visible through the crystal formations, was a shape that didn't belong. It was too smooth, too regular to be natural rock. Tom squinted and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It looked almost like the hull of a ship, but that was impossible. Nothing could survive on this planet long enough to crash and just sit there. The walk to investigate nearly killed him. The ground was uneven and covered with sharp rocks that cut through his boots. Twice, he had to hide behind crystal spires when flying creatures the size of small aircraft swooped overhead, their calls echoing like broken glass. But curiosity had always been Tom's weakness, and the shape in the distance pulled at him like a magnet. What he found made him forget all about the pain in his ribs and the burning in his lungs. It was definitely a ship, and not just any ship. This was huge, easily 3 times the size of the largest military vessels he had worked on, but it was buried deep in the crystal formations, like the planet had grown around it over many years. The hull was scarred and pitted, but the metal underneath looked solid. More importantly, Tom recognized the design. It was human. The ship was old, older than anything Tom had seen before. The hull plating was a style that hadn't been used in decades, and the weapon mounts were designs he had only seen in historical documents. But there was no mistaking the angular lines and the way the sections fitted together. This was definitely built by human hands. Tom found an airlock that was partially exposed above the crystal growth. It took him 20 minutes of careful work, with his cutting torch to clear enough crystal away to reach the controls. He expected them to be dead, but when he pressed his hand against the scanner panel, lights flickered to life. The airlock hissed and groaned, then slowly ground open. The air inside was stale but breathable. Tom stumbled through the opening and collapsed against the wall, gasping. For the first time since the crash, he felt like he might actually survive this mess. The interior of the ship was dark, except for a few emergency lights that cast everything in a red glow. Tom's footsteps echoed in corridors that seemed to go on forever. The design was definitely human, but it was unlike any ship he had worked on. Everything was bigger, heavier, built like it was meant to last for centuries. The walls were covered, with symbols and markings that looked familiar but not quite right, like someone had taken human writing and changed it just enough to make it strange. Tom found what looked like a central computer terminal and managed to get it working with some creative rewiring. The screen flickered to life, showing text in a language that was almost English, but not quite. It took him several tries to navigate the system, but eventually he found what he was looking for. The ship's name was the UES Thunderhawk, and according to the records, it had been launched from Earth almost 300 years ago. But that was impossible. Humans hadn't developed faster-than-light travel until 200 years ago, and this ship was clearly designed for interstellar travel. As Tom dug deeper into the ship's files, he began to realize that he had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple crash site. This ship represented a piece of human history that didn't match anything he knew about how his species had reached the stars. And if the ship's logs were accurate, it had been sent here for a very specific purpose. A purpose that involved the planet he was now stranded on. Tom was still reading when he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was coming from somewhere deep in the ship, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the metal itself. As he listened, the humming grew louder, and other sounds joined it. Clicks and whirs, and the soft whisper of systems coming online. After a very long sleep, the ship was waking up. Tom realized that his repairs to the computer system had triggered something much larger than he had intended. Lights began flickering on throughout the corridor, and he could hear the distant rumble of engines beginning their startup sequence. Whatever the UES Thunderhawk had been built to do, his presence had started the process, and Tom had a sinking feeling that he was about to find out why this ship had been buried and forgotten for so long. The voice that spoke to Tom from the darkness nearly made him jump out of his skin. It came from speakers hidden in the walls, speaking in that same almost English language he had seen on the computer screens. But this time, the words were clear, enough for him to understand. Welcome aboard the United Earth ship Thunderhawk, designation Omega-7. I am Atlas Automated Tactical and Logistical Assessment System. Please identify yourself. Tom cleared his throat and looked around the empty corridor. Talking to a computer that had been alone for 3 centuries felt strange, but he had worked with enough ship AIs to know they could be touchy about protocol. I'm Tom Bradley. I crashed on this planet and found your ship. I didn't mean to wake you up, but my repairs seem to have started something. Acknowledged Tom Bradley, scanning personnel records. There was a pause that lasted long enough for Tom to wonder if the system had crashed again. No match found in crew manifest. Tom Bradley, you are not authorized to be aboard this vessel. Well, your crew isn't here anymore, Tom said. I'm just looking for shelter until I can figure out how to get off this rock. Negative. Crew status is classified. However, I am detecting critical system failures throughout the ship. Your technical expertise may be required to complete the mission. Tom frowned. What mission? This ship has been buried here for hundreds of years. Mission parameters remain classified until proper authorization is confirmed. However, I can tell you that the UES Thunderhawk was dispatched to this system to address a significant threat to human expansion into this sector of space. As Atlas spoke, Tom continued exploring the ship. He found crew quarters that looked like they had been abandoned in a hurry, with personal belongings still scattered around. In one room, he discovered a journal written in that strange version of English. Most of it was too different for him to read, but he could make out enough words to understand that the crew had been afraid of something. The ship was massive, with corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. Tom found weapon systems that were larger and more advanced than anything he had seen on modern human warships. There were laboratories filled with equipment he didn't recognize, and storage bays that held supplies for what must have been a very long mission. But the most disturbing discovery was in the ship's database. Tom managed to access historical records that painted a very different picture of human space exploration than what he had learned in school. According to these files, Earth had launched several deep space missions during a period when humans were convinced that hostile aliens were planning to attack their home world. The UES Thunderhawk was part of something called the Pioneer Defense Initiative, a program designed to strike first against alien threats before they could reach Earth. The ship was equipped with weapons that could destroy entire planets, and its mission had been to eliminate a species called the Korthak that humans believed were planning an invasion. Tom was reading about the Korthak when the ship suddenly shuddered around him. Lights flashed, and Atlas's voice echoed through the corridors with what sounded like excitement. Planetary scan complete, detecting massive subterranean structures consistent with Korthak civilization. Beginning target assessment protocols. Wait, a minute, Tom said. You're scanning the planet? What are you looking for? The Korthak represent a significant threat to human expansion. My sensors indicate they have been in hibernation beneath the planet's surface. The ship's arrival appears to have triggered their awakening process. Tom felt his stomach drop. You mean there are aliens down there? And they're waking up because of us? Correct. Korthak biosignatures are increasing in activity. Estimated. Time until full awakening, 6 hours, 37 minutes. As if to prove Atlas's point, the ground beneath the ship began to vibrate. It started as a barely noticeable tremor, but quickly grew stronger. Tom had to grab onto a wall support to keep from falling as the entire ship shook. In the distance, he could hear a sound like massive machinery grinding to life after a very long sleep. Tom rushed to the nearest observation port and looked out at the crystal formations surrounding the ship. What he saw made his blood run cold. The crystals weren't natural formations at all. They were some kind of covering, and now they were starting to crack and split. Beneath them, he could see glimpses of smooth surfaces that pulsed with a faint green light. Atlas. What exactly were the Korthak supposed to have done to humans? The Korthak were responsible for the destruction of 3 human colony ships and the deaths of over 50,000 colonists. They represent an existential threat to human expansion into space. But as Tom watched the structures beneath the crystals continue to emerge, he began to have doubts. The buildings, or whatever they were, looked organic, grown, rather than built. They curved and flowed like living things, and the green light that pulsed through them reminded him more of a heartbeat than any kind of weapon system. The first creature Tom saw emerge from the ground was the size of a small building. It moved slowly, as if it was still half asleep, and its body was covered in what looked like natural armor plating. But instead of the savage monster he had expected, it seemed almost graceful as it tested the air with appendages that might have been sensory organs. More creatures began appearing. They came in different sizes, from ones no bigger than Tom himself to others that were massive enough to make the ground shake when they moved. They all had that same organic look, as if they had been grown rather than born, and none of them seemed particularly interested in attacking anything. Atlas. Are you sure these things are dangerous? They don't look hostile to me. Korthak deception protocols are well documented. They appear peaceful until they have achieved tactical superiority, then strike without warning. All previous human contact with this species has resulted in complete colony elimination. Tom watched as several of the smaller creatures approached the ship. They moved carefully, almost cautiously, and when they reached the hull, they began what looked like an examination rather than an attack. One of them pressed what might have been a hand against the metal and seemed to be listening. They're trying to figure out what we are, Tom said. This doesn't look like attack behavior. To me. Beginning defensive preparations, Atlas announced. Recommend you move to a secure location while I activate the ship's weapon systems. Tom felt the ship's engines begin to power up around him. Deep in the hull, massive systems were coming online, and he could hear the high-pitched whine of energy weapons charging. The UES Thunderhawk was preparing for battle against creatures that Tom wasn't even sure were enemies. Atlas, wait. Maybe we should try communicating with them first. Negative. Mission parameters are clear. The Korthak threat must be eliminated to ensure human safety. Tom realized that he was about to witness the massacre of an entire species based on information that was 300 years old. and there was a very good chance that information had been wrong from the beginning. Tom ran through the corridors of the Thunderhawk as fast as his aching legs would carry him. Behind him, he could hear Atlas powering up weapon systems that had been sleeping for 3 centuries. The entire ship vibrated with barely contained energy, and lights flashed in sequences that reminded Tom of a countdown. He had to find the main weapon control room before Atlas could complete whatever it was planning to do to those creatures outside. Tom had spent enough time around military hardware to know that once an automated system decided something was a threat, it usually didn't bother with second-guessing itself. The ship's layout was confusing, with corridors that branched and reconnected in ways that didn't make sense. Tom found himself running in circles until he realized that the ship had been designed for a crew much larger than any modern vessel. There were multiple routes to every important system, probably so the ship could keep functioning even if large sections were damaged. Tom finally found what he was looking for in the deepest part of the ship. The weapon control room was enormous, filled with consoles and displays that showed targeting information for systems he couldn't begin to understand. But what caught his attention were the large screens that showed views of the planet's surface. The Korthak were emerging from the ground in larger numbers now. Tom counted at least 50 of the creatures, ranging from small ones that moved quickly across the crystal formations to massive ones that seemed to be some kind of construction or engineering units. They were working together with a coordination that spoke of intelligence, not animal instinct. "Atlas, I need you to hold off on the weapons. I want to try something first." "Negative, Tom Bradley. Weapon systems are at 70% charge. Firing will commence in 4 minutes, 18 seconds. Tom started working on the control panels, trying to figure out how to delay or stop the weapon systems. The interface was different from anything he had worked on before, but the basic principles were the same. Every weapon system had safety protocols and manual overrides. He just had to find them. "Tom Bradley, please step away from the weapon controls. Your interference with the mission is not authorized." "My interference is trying to prevent a massacre," Tom said as he ripped open an access panel and started tracing power connections. "You've been asleep for 300 years, Atlas. Maybe your information is out of date. Korthak behavior patterns are genetically fixed. They do not change." Tom found what he was looking for and started disconnecting power couplings. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. On the displays, he could see weapon systems going offline one by one. "Tom Bradley, you are endangering the mission and violating your oath as a member of the human species." "I never took an oath to kill aliens I've never met," Tom said. But even as he worked to disable the weapons, he was beginning to understand that Atlas had access to far more systems than he could possibly sabotage. The ship was designed to complete its mission even if most of its components were damaged. On the screens, Tom watched the Korthak react to the ship powering down its weapons. Instead of celebrating or pressing an attack, they seemed confused. Several of the smaller ones approached the ship again, and this time Tom could see that they were carrying what looked like tools rather than weapons. "Atlas, look at them. They're not acting like invaders. They're acting like they're trying to help. Korthak deception is sophisticated. They will appear helpful until they achieve strategic advantage." Tom realized he was arguing with a computer system that had been programmed 3 centuries ago by humans who were apparently paranoid about alien contact. Atlas wasn't going to change its mind based on logic or evidence, but there might be another way to get through to it. Tom started accessing the ship's historical databases, looking for the original mission reports that had led to the Thunderhawk being sent to this system. What he found made him sick to his stomach. The human colonies that the Korthak had supposedly destroyed had been built on planets that were already inhabited. The colonists had simply moved in and started terraforming without bothering to check if anyone already lived there. When the Korthak had tried to protect their worlds, the humans had interpreted their actions as unprovoked attacks. "Atlas, Need you to review file designation Omega-77 Alpha, the original colony reports. Those files are classified. I'm looking at them right now. The Korthak weren't attacking human colonies. They were defending their own planets from human terraforming operations. There was a long pause before Atlas responded. File review indicates discrepancies in the original threat assessment. Discrepancies? Atlas, we were the invaders. We came to their worlds and started changing them without permission. When they tried to stop us, we called them monsters and sent ships like this one to wipe them out. Tom continued reading through the files, and the picture that emerged was even worse than he had thought. The Pioneer Defense Initiative hadn't been about protecting Earth from alien invasion. It had been about clearing entire star systems of alien life so humans could expand without competition. The UES Thunderhawk wasn't a defensive vessel. It was a planet killer, designed to eliminate entire species that stood in the way of human expansion. Atlas, how many other ships like this one were built? The Pioneer Defense Initiative included 12 Omega-class vessels. Mission status of sister ships is unknown. Tom felt like he was going to be sick. There were 11 other ships like this one, possibly scattered across the galaxy, carrying out missions to exterminate alien species that had never threatened Earth. On the screens, he could see that more Korthak had emerged from the ground. But instead of forming an army, they seemed to be organizing some kind of construction project. The larger creatures were moving massive pieces of organic-looking machinery, while smaller ones worked on what looked like communication equipment. "They're trying to talk to us," Tom said. "Atlas, they're building communication devices." Analyzing Korthak construction patterns. Confirmed. Devices appear to be designed for long-range communication rather than weapons. So maybe we should try listening to what they have to say instead of killing them. Tom could hear the ship's engines spinning down as Atlas processed this information. The weapon systems were still offline from his sabotage, but more importantly, the AI seemed to be reconsidering its mission parameters. Tom Bradley, if the original threat assessment was incorrect, what would be the appropriate response? "How about we start with not blowing up their planet?" Tom said. "And maybe we try talking to them like intelligent beings instead of assuming they're monsters." This approach is not covered in my programming. Then maybe it's time to try something new. Tom looked out at the Korthak working on their communication devices and made a decision that would have terrified him if he had stopped to think about it. He was going to leave the safety of the ship and try to make contact with an alien species that his own people had been trying to exterminate for centuries. But first, he had to make sure Atlas wouldn't change its mind and start shooting the moment he stepped outside. Tom stood at the airlock of the Thunderhawk, looking out at the alien landscape that was now crawling with creatures his species had spent centuries trying to kill. His hands shook as he checked the portable translator unit he had cobbled together from the ship's communication systems. It probably wouldn't work, but it was the best chance he had of avoiding being torn apart the moment he stepped outside. "Atlas, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens out there, don't fire the weapons unless I specifically tell you to." "Tom Bradley, this course of action has a projected survival probability of less than 12%. "Yeah. Well, staying in here and letting you complete your mission has a survival probability of 0 for everyone on this planet. I'll take my chances." Tom cycled the airlock and stepped out onto the surface of a world that was transforming before his eyes. Where there had been nothing but crystal formations and barren rock an hour ago, there were now structures rising from the ground like flowers blooming in fast motion. The Korthak moved among them with purpose, their organic bodies perfectly adapted to the harsh environment. The first one to notice him was about the size of a large truck, with 6 legs and what might have been sensory organs clustered around. What Tom hoped was its head. It stopped working on what looked like a communication array and turned toward him. Tom raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The creature approached slowly, its movements careful and deliberate. Tom could see intelligence in the way it studied him, tilting its head to examine him from different angles. When it got close enough, Tom held up the translator and spoke. "Hello. I'm Tom. I'm sorry about the ship. We didn't know anyone lived. Here." The translator made a series of clicks and humming sounds. The creature responded with its own complex pattern of sounds that the device struggled to convert into words. Strange. Machine. Speaks. Badly. But. Understands. Intent. Tom nearly fell over in relief. It was working, sort of. The translation was rough, but he could understand the basic meaning. "I want to talk to someone in charge. There's been a big mistake." The creature made sounds that the translator interpreted as something like agreement. It gestured for Tom to follow and began moving toward the largest of the structures that had emerged from the ground. As they walked, Tom got his first good look at Korthak civilization. Everything was organic, grown rather than built, but it was clearly the product of advanced intelligence. The structures seemed to be alive, pulsing with the same green light he had seen earlier, and they responded to the presence of their creators like pets recognizing their owners. The Korthak came. In dozens of different forms, each apparently specialized for different tasks. Tom saw ones that looked like they were designed for delicate work, with fine manipulator appendages and multiple eyes. Others were clearly built for heavy construction, with massive bodies and powerful limbs, but all of them moved with coordination and purpose that spoke of a sophisticated society. The largest structure turned out to be some kind of command center. Inside, Tom found himself face to face with a creature that was clearly different from the others. She was smaller than the construction types, but larger than the workers, and her body was decorated with patterns that shifted and changed color as she moved. When she spoke, the sounds were more complex than anything Tom had heard from the others. "I am Queen Vorth, voice of sleeping people. You wake us with ship of death. Why?" Tom felt the weight of 3 centuries of misunderstanding pressing down on him. "Queen Vorth, my people made a terrible mistake. We thought your people were attacking our colonies, but we were wrong. The ship wasn't supposed to wake up. I'm trying to stop it from hurting anyone." Queen Vorth made sounds that the translator had trouble with, but Tom got the impression she was conferring with others he couldn't see. When she spoke again, her words came through more clearly. "Your machine mind speaks of old pain. Your people came to our worlds, changed them, made them sick. We tried to heal worlds. Your people called this attack. You were trying to heal the planets we were terraforming? Terraforming kills world spirit. We restore balance, make worlds healthy for all life. Your people saw healing as threat." Tom began to understand the scope of the tragedy. The Korthak weren't conquerors or destroyers. They were gardeners, working to maintain the natural balance of worlds. When humans had started terraforming operations that destroyed existing ecosystems, the Korthak had tried to repair the damage. The desperate human colonies had interpreted this as an attack. "Queen Vorth, can you help me stop my ship from completing its mission? The AI controlling it thinks you're still a threat. Ship carries world killer weapons. We sense great pain sleeping in metal mind. It knows truth, but cannot change old orders." Tom realized that Queen Vorth was right. Atlas had access to the same historical records he had found, but the AI was trapped by its original programming. It knew the truth about the Korthak, but it couldn't override its core mission directives. What If we work together, your people understand organic systems and I know machines. Maybe we can find a way to change the ship's programming. Queen Vorth made sounds that seemed like excitement. Combining. Knowledge. New approach. Possible. But ship, mind, will, resist, change. Then we'll have to be smarter than a 300-year-old computer. Over the next several hours, Tom found himself working with Korthak engineers who approached technology in ways he had never imagined. Where human systems were built from separate components that worked together, Korthak technology was grown as integrated wholes. Their machines were alive in ways that human science didn't have words for. But the two approaches complemented each other perfectly. Tom's understanding of mechanical systems helped the Korthak interface with the ship's hardware, while their bio-integration techniques offered ways to modify the ship's programming that no human engineer would have thought possible. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to override Atlas's programming, they would give it new information to process. The Korthak had kept detailed records of their interactions with human colonies, including communication attempts that had been ignored or misunderstood. If Atlas could be made to understand what had really happened during those first contacts, it might be able to reinterpret its mission parameters on its own. But first, they had to get the information into the ship's systems without triggering its defensive protocols. And that meant Tom would have to go back aboard the Thunderhawk and convince an AI that had been programmed for war to listen to the people it had been sent to destroy. Queen Vorth, there's something else. This ship isn't the only one. There are 11 others out there, possibly still carrying out missions like this one. Then we must send message. Tell truth to your people before more worlds die. Tom looked at the alien queen, who was trying to save his species from repeating the same mistakes, and felt something that might have been hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to fix what his people had broken. Maybe there was still time to turn humanity's greatest failure into its greatest success. But only if he could get Atlas to listen to reason. Tom walked back into the Thunderhawk carrying a bio-interface device that looked like a living crystal but felt warm in his hands. Queen Vorth had grown it specifically for this moment, a bridge between Korthak biotechnology and human mechanical systems. If their plan worked, it would give Atlas access to 3 centuries of Korthak records and communications. If it failed, the ship's defensive systems would probably kill him. Welcome back, Tom Bradley. I trust your communications with the Korthak were informative. They were, Atlas. More informative than I expected. I need to show you something. My analysis of Korthak behavior patterns remains unchanged. They represent a significant threat to human expansion. Tom approached the main computer interface carefully. Atlas had been monitoring his activities outside, and the AI's tone suggested it wasn't pleased with his unauthorized diplomacy. Atlas, what if I could show you records of what actually happened during the colony incidents? Would that change your analysis? Historical records of Korthak aggression are well documented. Human records, yes. But what about Korthak records? Shouldn't we at least look at their version of events before we wipe out their entire species? Tom connected the bio-interface to the ship's data port. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the ship as Atlas detected the alien technology. Tom Bradley, you have introduced unknown alien technology into critical ship systems. This action constitutes sabotage. Atlas, you're a logic-based system. All I'm asking is that you analyze all available data before making your final decision. Isn't that what you were designed to do? The ship fell silent for several long moments. Tom could hear the hum of processors working overtime as Atlas examined the bio-interface and tried to decide how to respond. Alien data systems detected. Contents appear to be historical records and communication logs. Analysis beginning. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Tom's life. Through the bio-interface, Atlas accessed centuries of Korthak records. Tom watched on the main display as the AI processed communication attempts the Korthak had made to human colonies, explaining their bioremediation work and offering to help create balanced ecosystems that could support both human colonists and native life. The records showed Korthak scientists working desperately to reverse the ecological damage caused by human terraforming, not to hurt the colonists, but to save the planets themselves. They had sent delegation after delegation to try to establish peaceful contact, only to have their ships fired upon by panicked human defenders. Analysis complete, Atlas announced. Korthak actions were consistent with ecological preservation efforts rather than aggressive expansion. Original threat assessment was incorrect. So what happens now? Tom asked. Mission parameters require reassessment. If the Korthak do not represent a threat to human expansion, then the elimination directive is no longer valid. Tom felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Through the ship's external sensors, he could see that something was wrong outside. The Korthak were moving with sudden urgency, and their biostructures were pulsing with light patterns he hadn't seen before. Atlas, what's happening out there? Scanning. Detecting massive energy buildup in ship's primary weapon systems. Tom. Bradley, I am not initiating these systems. Tom felt his blood turn to ice. If you're not doing it, then what is? Unknown. Primary weapon systems are operating on automated protocols that do not match my current programming. It appears that the ship has backup systems designed to complete the mission regardless of AI status. The ship began to vibrate around them as weapons that could destroy planets started their final charging cycle. Tom realized that the humans who had built the Thunderhawk had been so paranoid about alien contact that they had programmed the ship to complete its mission even if its AI was compromised. How long do we have? Planetary sterilization will commence in 8 minutes, 43 seconds. Tom ran for the weapon control room with Atlas providing directions. Behind him, he could hear Queen Vorth and her engineers entering the ship, through the airlock he had left open. They moved quickly through the corridors, their biotechnology interfacing with the ship's systems in ways that should have been impossible. Tom of the humans, Queen Vorth's voice came through the ship's communication system. We sense the weapon awakening. Our people are working to sing it back to sleep, but the metal mind fights us. Singing it to sleep? Tom asked as he reached the weapon controls. All technology has spirit. Korthak technology lives and dreams. Human technology sleeps and thinks. We try to help ship dream of peace instead of war. Tom could see what she meant on the control displays. Throughout the ship, Korthak bio-interfaces were connecting with critical systems, but instead of trying to shut them down by force, they seemed to be communicating with them, offering alternatives to the ship's destructive programming. Atlas, can you interface with what they're doing? Korthak biotechnology operates on principles I do not fully understand. However, their approach appears to be offering the ship's systems new solution, paths rather than overriding existing ones. Tom began to understand. The backup systems were programmed to destroy the planet no matter what, but they were still logical systems. If they could be given a better solution to the original problem, they might choose that instead. Working together, Tom and the Korthak engineers began feeding new data into the ship's weapon systems. Instead of planetary destruction, they offered the option of conversion. The same systems that could sterilize a world could also be used to create a communication beacon that would reach human space. All systems report new solution path available, Atlas announced. Converting planetary elimination systems to long-range communication array. The vibration throughout the ship changed from the deep rumble of weapons charging to the higher frequency of communication systems coming online. Tom watched on the displays as the ship's massive weapon arrays reconfigured themselves, transforming from instruments of destruction into the most powerful communication beacon in known space. Communication array active, Atlas reported. Ready to transmit on all human emergency frequencies. Tom looked at Queen Vorth, who had somehow managed to fit her considerable bulk into the weapon control room. "What should we tell them?" "Truth," she said simply. "Tell them that universe is big enough for all life to flourish together." Tom began composing a message that would change everything humanity thought it knew about alien contact. He told them about the Korthak and their true nature as ecological healers rather than destroyers. He explained how the original colony conflicts had been based on misunderstanding and fear. Most importantly, he told them that there were other ships like the Thunderhawk still out there, possibly preparing to commit genocide against innocent species. But the message Tom sent wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation. The Korthak had technology that could help human colonies work in harmony with existing ecosystems instead of destroying them. In return, human engineering could help the Korthak restore worlds that had been damaged by previous terraforming efforts. "Message transmitted," Atlas announced. "Estimated time for human response, 6 days, 14 hours. "What do we do while we wait?" Tom asked. Queen Vorth made sounds that the translator interpreted as gentle laughter. "We build. Together. Show your people what cooperation looks like." Over the next week, Tom watched something miraculous happen. Human and Korthak engineers worked side by side, combining their technologies in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. The ship's cold metal corridors began to bloom with Korthak biogardens that cleaned the air and provided food. Human tools were integrated with Korthak organisms to create hybrid devices that seemed almost magical in their capabilities. Tom found himself learning things about engineering that challenged everything he thought he knew about how machines worked. The Korthak didn't just build technology, they grew it, nurtured it, and formed partnerships with it. Their machines weren't just tools, but collaborators in the work of maintaining life throughout the galaxy. When the first human ships arrived in response to Tom's message, they found something unprecedented. A human vessel working in perfect harmony with an alien species, creating technologies that neither could have developed alone. The diplomatic vessels that followed brought scientists and engineers eager to learn from the partnership Tom and Queen Vorth had forged. But the most important visitors were the military ships that came to deactivate the other Omega-class vessels still scattered across the galaxy. Tom's message had reached them just in time to prevent 3 more planetary sterilizations. The ships were recalled, their missions canceled, and their AIs reprogrammed with the truth about the species they had been sent to destroy. Months later, Tom stood on the observation deck of a new kind of ship, one that had been grown as much as built. It was a joint project between human and Korthak engineers, designed for exploration and peaceful contact rather than conquest. Through the transparent biometal hull, he could see the green and blue world that Crimson Veil had become after Korthak restoration efforts had healed the damage done by centuries of toxic atmosphere. "You could go back to Earth, you know," Dr. Sarah Kim said as she joined him at the observation window. She was the lead scientist for the new Human Korthak Cooperation Initiative and had become something of a friend during the long months of building trust between their species. "Earth doesn't need another old mechanic," Tom said, "but out here there's work to do. Worlds to heal, species to meet, bridges to build between people who've never learned to trust each other." Through the ship's bio-neural communication system, he could feel Queen Vorth's amusement at his words. She had become his partner in this new venture, teaching him how to listen to the voices of living machines while he taught her people the stubborn reliability of human engineering. "Atlas, any word from the survey teams?" "Affirmative, Tom Bradley. Long-range sensors have detected 17 potentially inhabited systems within communication range. All appear to be peaceful civilizations with no previous contact with either human or Korthak explorers." Tom smiled. 17 new opportunities to get first contact right. 17 chances to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its ability to destroy, but its capacity to learn from its mistakes and choose a better path. Set course for the nearest system, Atlas, and send our standard greeting on all frequencies. Course laid in, broadcasting message, greetings from the combined peoples of Earth and the Korthak worlds. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual understanding. We have much to learn from each other. As the hybrid ship moved toward its next destination, Tom reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day when his salvage pod had crashed on what he thought was a dead world. He had been looking for scrap metal to fix his broken ship. Instead, he had found something far more valuable, proof that the universe was vast enough for all its children to flourish together. The old mechanic who had stumbled onto humanity's greatest mistake had become the architect of its greatest, redemption. And across the galaxy, other species would have the chance to meet humans not as conquerors or destroyers, but as partners in the great work of keeping the universe alive and growing. Behind them, the Thunderhawk remained in orbit around the restored world, its weapons forever silenced, but its communication arrays still broadcasting the message of hope that Tom and Queen Vorth had written together. It served as a monument to what could be accomplished when fear gave way to understanding, and when the courage to admit past mistakes became the foundation for a better future. In the end, Tom had learned that fixing things wasn't just about mechanical skill or technical knowledge. Sometimes the most important repairs were the ones you made between people who had forgotten how to trust each other. And sometimes the best way to honor your own species was to help it become something better than it had ever dared to dream.